What is the most creepiest, bone-chilling thing you have ever read online that claims to be true?
Experience 1. True story time. I was about 4 or 5 years old, and my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I liked sleeping in her bed whenever I was staying with her. Our 2 bedrooms were at the end of a hallway, directly across from each other. Our apartment was on the first floor, and I remember that it was in the middle of the summer and my mom had a window open in her room that was directly behind the bed, above the headboard. Anyway, I woke up in the middle of the night and remember sitting up and seeing that our cat was sitting in the door frame of my mom's room. Her door was open, and you could partially see into my bedroom. It was strange because our cat was a huge snuggler and was typically always in bed with us. As I was watching him, he walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to face my mom and wake her up. In the 3 seconds it took her to wake up and ask me what was wrong, we both looked back up in the door frame and a man was standing by my open door, making his way out of my bedroom. I still don't know how she managed to do it so quickly, but my mother proceeded to pick me up and literally throw me out of the screen window. Again, we were on the first floor, and it was maybe a 3-foot drop to the ground. She quickly followed, and we were able to start screaming for help, and someone called 911. The police came but didn't see any signs of forced entry. Only that our front door was unlocked, which led them to believe the man must have exited that way. But the strange thing was that my mom swore up and down that she had locked the door that night with a deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, she was cleaning the kitchen and opened up our water heater closet and found a notebook with names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The man had been in our house and hid until we were asleep. Experience 2. It was the story of an ex-Marine who was driving on the road at night, and he saw a car in the middle of the road with 2 people lying on the ground. He has this gut feeling that something is wrong, and he decides to act on it by driving past the car and the 2 people. While he is driving, he takes a look at his rearview mirror to see the 2 people lying on the road standing up with 10 other people coming out of the bushes. I did not know that a-holes like this existed. Experience 3. I don't remember what the link was, but it was a forum of people with infectious diseases coordinating to send vials of blood to people with other infectious diseases. They would take low doses of antibiotics to weaken the effect of the antibiotics and strengthen the strains of diseases. I remember thinking that this was the kind of stuff that the CDC would get involved in immediately. It was basically bioterrorism. Experience 4. Short story time. My friends and I were having a sleepover in junior high when we first read that creepypasta. We were all sufficiently freaked out by it, to say the least, especially because the area in my friend's house that we were staying in had huge, almost ceiling floor windows and a large glass sliding door with no blinds. They had recently moved in and hadn't gotten them yet. The house also backed up to the woods, so being a bunch of sissy 12-year-olds, we were freaked out. We talked about it a bit and decided it just couldn't have been real. After a lot of reasoning and discussion, we figured it was just a stupid story, turned off the computer and went on our way playing video games and watching TV and whatnot. So, we fall asleep, but I wake up in the middle of the night to go get something to drink. I noticed my friend's computer, which was facing the area where we were sleeping, had been turned on. Funny, I was sure we turned it off. I logged on and the background of the computer was a freaking picture of us sleeping. I lost my crap. I screamed and woke up my friends to show them, and we all just lost it. We then realized our phones weren't where we left them, as one of them went to call their parents to pick them up because they were so freaked out. We looked around and saw them on the table by the TV, and we went to look at them. The backgrounds on all of our phones were pictures of each of us sleeping. We screamed so loud in horror, only to hear someone laughing. My friend's older brother came downstairs and was laughing hysterically. Turns out the bastard had heard us talking and decided to scare us, took our phones and messed with them. We then confronted him about the computer background. He seemed confused. He hadn't touched the computer. He didn't even know my friend's password to log on. Plus, the webcam on it was brand new and he didn't know how to use it. Now the brother is freaked out, and we all start panicking again. When we hear another laugh, my friend's dad now comes down the stairs, almost in tears from laughter. Turns out my friend's father snuck down after the brother, having seen what he did, and changed the computer background. Experience 5. I've read about serial killers quite a lot. I just find the subject fascinating and never really get caught up on or affected by grisly details. Sure, I feel sad for the victims and their loved ones, but the gore and depravity never really bother me. Dahmer, Chikatilo, Gain, Fish, read all about them in detail and was perfectly fine. However, there was one guy whose deeds really did crap me up, Dean Corll. He was America's most prolific serial killer before Ted Bundy took the dubious distinction, so I thought it strange that I'd never heard of him before. The short of it is that he was a pretty normal guy in his younger years. A bit of repressed homosexuality, but nothing about him could have hinted at what he was capable of. He basically groomed and paid 2 boys to supply him with their friends and, when they ran out, other kids in several neighborhoods he lived over the years. He would tie these kids, all boys, to his torture board where he would abuse, R-word, mutilate, and ultimately kill them. Then he would dispose of the bodies in several locations, including a boathouse. These activities went on for several years, and he was very careful and methodical about the whole thing. I don't think it was ever suspected by authorities that the large number of missing boys was connected. The thing that really shook me up is how the 2 boys he recruited were so callous and were perfectly fine in sending boys of their own age and social group/school to their deaths for cash, and were quite happy to aid Corll in torturing the victims and disposing of the bodies. Eventually, one of the boys brought a girl to his friend. Corll, angry and annoyed and scared the girl might report him, set about killing the girl. But the boy must have liked her or something, because he ended up shooting and killing Corll to protect her. I think the fact he was never captured or faced punishment for his crimes makes him much creepier than other serial killers. He was never seen on the stand or in a jumpsuit in jail, so he seems less human for it. He was never analyzed by psychologists and found to be a madman or deeply disturbed. There's just no logic or reason behind his crimes other than his gratification. He's just emblazoned in my mind as some kind of heinous boogeyman above and beyond the reach of man's police and justice system. That's why he screws me up more than any other serial killer I've read about. I can't remember the article or where on the web it was, but it was a lot more detailed than the Wikipedia article and included Polaroid pictures of victims, some still unidentified, strapped to his torture board awaiting their horrific, untimely ends. Not for the faint of heart. Experience 6. An ex-boyfriend of mine was an Iraqi Kurd. He told me a crazy story from camping in the woods in northern Iraq. He and a few friends were skipping school the day before the weekend, Thursday in the Middle East. They had plans to go right after school, thus their parents thought they were at school, so they left their iPhones at home so their parents couldn't see where they are. The rumor in the area outside is that in the woods outside Erbil, the people who were gassed by Saddam were banished. The ones that lived, with their birth defects, essentially hills have eyes, human corpses stripped of flesh have been found in cabins, and authorities refuse to enter those woods, etc., etc. So back to my ex, they arrive at the woods and park their car on the road at the bottom of a hill. They set camp and make a fire and begin like teenage boys to scare the crap out of each other and recall the stories about these banished, for lack of a better word, mutants. As night falls, they begin to hear whispering in the trees and twigs snapping. They retreat to the tent and let the fire die alone outside out of fear. As the fire dies, they hear the voices getting closer and start to panic, trying to keep quiet. There are more than a dozen mutants outside the tent. They hear all of their stuff being rummaged through, and they lie petrified in the tent just looking at each other. One of the mutants asks if they should see who's in the tent, to which another replied, "Leave them." Unable to call for help, they wait till dawn breaks, only to find their entire camp destroyed with no money missing, no electronics missing, just food, cooking pots, and clothing missing. Trying to gather what had happened, a lone woman walks down the hill towards them. She has no fingers and is wrapped in fabric shreds. At this point, they bolt barefoot down the hill, trying to reach the car. When my ex reaches the bottom near a stream, he stops to cross it, and squatting in the river taking a piss is a young girl with no hair, no nose, and a missing eye. Just staring at him, she starts to scream as loud as she can. Worried she'll alert the others, he keeps running. When he got to the car, his friends were waiting for him, but the car had been raided already and they had left the keys at the camp. Needless to say, they walked till they hitched a ride. A few months later, an Austrian film crew fled the forest in the same manner after filming a documentary. However, they had found reportedly a cabin full of filleted human carcasses in police and military uniforms. Experience 7. Not something I read, but something that happened to me. I am not a good storyteller, so bear with me. A couple of years back, my best friend and I went on a road trip to the States for a music festival. I met up with some friends, saw lots of things and whatnot. One of our friends came back home with us. He needed to get back home for school and his buddies didn't want to head home yet. We decided to drive straight home in shifts, took 24 hours for the full drive. Anyway, my story starts when I am driving, the night shift at about 2 a.m. It is a beautifully clear night. Full moon, no clouds, middle of the summer party type night. While noticing all of these conditions, I also noticed we have followed the GPS onto a back road and driven into a huge valley. Open fields, not another car or house in sight, and it is important to note that we have not seen anyone or anything relating to human presence for a few hours. Upon entering this valley, we lose our satellite signal. We have no satellite radio, no GPS, and no cell signal. Cool beans don't really matter, as I know we follow this road for a couple more hours. About 20 minutes after entering this valley and after losing all our connections, we come upon a bridge. As we get closer, I see a car pulled out on the side of the road. Not uncommon, people sleep in pullouts when they can. What is uncommon is this car has all of its windows blacked out. With all of the light from the moon, we should be able to see at least partially inside, but it was completely black. Getting closer, we also realized that it has no license plate that we can see. No big deal, we assumed that it is abandoned out here in the boonies. That is until we pass this vehicle and almost immediately its lights turn on, and it pulls out behind us on the road. Now this is where it gets creepy. This vehicle starts tailgating us in the middle of nowhere, and we can't see who is inside or anything. Again, we brush it off. Maybe he is lost, needs to follow someone out of the area. It doesn't explain the windows being blacked out or the lack of a license plate, however. Anyway, with this car following us, I start to get an uneasy feeling. Subtle at first, but grows stronger. Soon I get an all-out get the heck away from this vehicle ASAP feeling. I find it important to note that I do not frighten easily, I do not panic, and I only have ever gotten this feeling in times when I know for a fact my life is in danger. I push these feelings aside, as it seems like the silliest response to a possibly explainable situation, that is, until I see something in the middle of the road. Almost on cue, this car backs off, as I and my companions, one of whom was asleep beforehand, try to make out what is in the middle of the road. Coming closer, we see what looks to be a body lying in the middle of the lanes. This is not a big road, and like I said, it was also a back road, still paved, but very small. At this moment, and at the sight of what appears to be a body on the road ahead, we start freaking out. I, in no way, am stopping for anyone in this desolate and isolated area. There are no other vehicles around other than the one following us, and I can see no housing or lights for as far as the eye can see. No cell service, no satellite, nothing. I quickly tell the others that I am not stopping and that I am going around or through. By this time, we are almost on it. There is no room to go around, as there are no shoulders on the road and deep ditches on the sides. And we are close enough to see now that it is a scarecrow, and I drive over top and onwards. This car, small enough to go around it, continues to follow. I speed up, it speeds up, I slow down, it slows down. Until I punch it. After about 2 minutes of this, the car slows down, does a turn, and drives back. Now my passenger turns to me and says, "I swear I saw spikes in that thing." Lucky for us, we were driving a huge truck. The wheel span was bigger than the scarecrow on the road, and we never even touched it. It was another half hour before we reached cell services and the satellite picked back up. It wasn't until we reached home at 5 a.m. that we remembered. During this time, there had been a couple of missing people reported in our province, ones who were on vacation and driving home from the States who never made it home or were ever found. I and my passengers fully believed that we escaped some crazy Wolf Creek type of death for ourselves. Anyway, that's my crappy story, 100% true. Sorry for how long it was. To answer the police questions, yes, we contacted the police about it and ended up making a full police report. However, we were unable to pinpoint the exact location. There wasn't anything they could really do other than file the report. We definitely didn't want this to happen to anyone else, as it was creepy as hell. And sorry about the formatting, it was showing up on my screen as paragraphed. Experience 8. This will likely get buried by now, but it stands as the most terrifying night of my life. Not only because I was scared crapless, but because it could have been much, much worse. I was living in Koreatown, in LA. Being pretty broke, and desiring independence from a slew of awful roommates I had previously endured, it was the best option for me, also given its proximity to Hollywood, downtown, both places I often work, and the subway line. I didn't own a car. The building attracted inhabitants of all sorts, mostly just immigrant families doing their best to get by, college students, and starving actors and artists. I was familiar with all of my neighbors' faces, and I knew who lived in the building. We had our local cholo kids who would hang out in the front of the building, sometimes tag the dumpster, often get shaken down by police for pot or stealing bikes in midday, but otherwise not threatening in that I fear for my life sense. They knew me. One was a budding artist, and I gave him extra pencils and paper when I could. I felt relatively safe, despite the area's reputation, because I lived on the 4th floor of an old brick building you had to have a key to enter unless you were Spider-Man and could jump the height of the 1st floor to reach the fire escape. Anyway, I lived alone in a tiny studio. This particular night, and the few nights before it, I had 2 male friends staying over. One had just been evicted and the other was a good friend of mine. This night, at least I was not by myself. It was a Friday at around 10:30 p.m., and although I enjoy a decent social life, my friends know I go out at weekends, or used to. Anyway, I and my buddies decided to watch a movie and call it a night. An hour later, I noticed feet walking around outside my door. Being an indoor apt, we had bright fluorescent lights on in the hall at all times. I lived at the end of the hall next to the fire escape, where residents often went outside to smoke, me included. The feet were not of a quick cigarette break, I'm going to head back now intent. They paced outside my door. Had I not been sleeping on a mattress on the floor at the time, I probably would not have been at an angle to notice this or the persistence of it. Then the figure came to a stop in front of my door. A figure so large it blocked out most of the hallway light completely from the left side of the door frame to the ceiling. It paused. The doorknob jiggles. By this point, my friends and I had all noticed and were frozen in fear. Our lights were off, and it seemed nobody was home. Or at least, I hoped. My app was visible from the street, so who knows who saw what lights turn off and when, or the glow of a television. Thunderous knocking. Boom, boom, boom. My name, I know you in there. The voice is heavy and unfamiliar. It sounded like a chef from South Park. It sounded angry. It knew my name. My friend Justin slowly walks to the kitchen 5 feet away and pulls a knife from my drawer. We sit in silence. More knocking. The walls are so thin you can hear the neighbors talking on their cell phones. We were terrified, and calling the police might alert the person outside to us. Another set of feet under the door. More knocking. More jiggling. Something that sounded like a pick scratching into my keyholes. My door had a regular lock, a chain, and a deadbolt. Thank God. It held. I do not remember how or when I fell asleep that night, frozen in fear. What I do remember, though, is opening my door the next morning and seeing about 4 cigarette butts and ashes. Whoever was there probably assumed that since I was not answering the door, I was out for the night, and they were staking out my apartment until I got back. Then, who knows what else? R-word, robbery, and murder are still common in that area. It took me 4 months before I could move out. After that event, I never had another visit. I asked my Cholo boys up front if they knew anything. They told me they saw about 5 unfamiliar black guys outside my building that night.
We hope you enjoyed listening to today's stories. If you want to see more stories, check out these videos or check the links in the description for more videos. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And ring that notification bell.